scratched the surface last week on this idea of growing older and wiser. All of us can agree that we are growing older, whether we like it or not. Doesn't matter how old we are right now, every day we're getting a little bit older. But the question we need to ask ourselves is, am I getting any wiser? Just because we get older doesn't necessarily mean we're getting any wiser, does it? The type of wisdom that we're seeking, though, is different than just acquiring knowledge. I mean, we can look at people in the secular world, people that don't know God, and we can see people that have a certain measure of wisdom just from the knowledge and the information that they've acquired. You know, everybody has life experiences, and hopefully we learn from those life experiences. We make mistakes. We learn from those mistakes. We alter course. But, you know, that's something that people in the secular world can do. But what we're seeking is the kind of wisdom that can only come from God. I'm going to start off with a couple of questions. And like I said last week, when I ask a question, it's typically not going to be rhetorical. Please, if you feel comfortable speaking up, I want this to be a discussion. So, you know, feel free to share. The question I want to ask is, think about who the wisest person is you've ever known. And that, you know, that could be anybody. That could be a friend. That could be somebody in this church. We have a lot of wise people in this congregation. Probably for most of us, the first person that's going to come to mind is going to be somebody like a father or a mother or maybe a grandfather or grandmother. I don't know who that is, so I want you to think about that. Who you consider the wisest person you've ever known. And I want to follow that question up with another question, and that is, under what circumstances did you see that person most reveal their wisdom? You know, was there a particular period in their lives when you understood just how wise they were? Or maybe there was a particular situation where you saw them reveal their wisdom. And I want you to think about that. We're going to continue on with our discussion, but I want to give you time to think about that, and then we'll circle back to those two questions a little bit later. And if, you know, one or two or three of y'all want to share, that would be great. And I'll tell you who I think the wisest person is I've known. So last week we started off the discussion. Am I too loud?
No.
Okay, all right. Tell me if I get too loud. So last week we started off our discussion with a question. And I asked the question, how do we view aging and getting older in our culture here in the United States? Do we look at it favorably, or do we kind of look at it negatively? And I think the consensus was that at the very least, we're conditioned to believe that we need to hang on to our youth at all costs. We need to go to all these special measures to fight the aging process and to hang on to our youth. And James Hall talked about, you know, all you got to do is turn on your TV or listen to your radio, and you hear all of these commercials about, you know, the one I think about is there's this miracle wrinkle cream, and, you know, you put it on the bags under your eyes and your crow's feet, and they show it, you know, in time lapse. 2 minutes later, you look 10 years younger. One of the commercials I hear on the radio is these nutrition supplements. You take one or two a day, and you feel 10 years younger. I hope, though, that as Christians, we don't buy into this false idea, this false hope that we are able to artificially add years to our lives. I mean, we can do that through trying to live more healthily, but as far as using, you know, no amount of these creams and procedures and nutritional supplements and medicine, whatever, no amount of that is going to change the fact that we're still getting older. Agreed? So I really hope that as believers that we don't hang on to this I think misguided idea that we should hang on, dig our claws into our youth and try to hang on to it for as long as we can. I think that as Christians, we should probably have an entirely different attitude towards aging than the rest of the world, right? Than the secular world. Now, this is maybe easier for me to say than anybody else because last week I was the second to youngest person in this class. Now Jake and his wife have joined us, so now they're even younger than me. But still, before I say this, I'm going to have to say maybe take it with a grain of salt because it's coming from a guy that has not suffered some of those things that we suffer from as we age, pain and loss of energy and all that. But I do think that as Christians, we can have an attitude of looking forward to that period of our lives, to being older. We can embrace it and accept it as a part of life and really see it as an honor and a privilege. To me, old age is a gift from God. A lot of times we look at it with all of the trouble that we suffer in old age, our physical frailties and all of that, the pain, and some people look at it and consider it a curse. But as Christians, I hope that we can look past that and see it as a gift from God. Proverbs 16, verse 31. I'll just read it. This is the first verse that I thought of as I was thinking about what are some verses in the Bible that really tell us what God's attitude is towards aging. And Proverbs 16:31 says, "Gray hair is a crown of splendor. It is attained in the way of righteousness." I like the way that sounds, a crown of splendor. It's not something to be ashamed of. It's not something to be covered up. It's a crown. It's a sign of achievement. Proverbs 20, verse 29 says, "The glory of young men is their strength. Gray hair is the splendor of the old." Let me read that one more time. "The glory of young men is their strength. Gray hair is the splendor of the old." The thing I like about that verse right there is it reminds me, at least, that God has a purpose for us at every stage of our lives. Not too long ago, I took Preston down to the care center and dropped him off. It was the day that they were unloading a truck. And I said, "Hey, I think you need to do this, to serve others." And so I dropped him off down there, and you watch a kid like that, they can unload a truck full of water bottles and all of that and not break a sweat. And it kind of makes you envious because you think, well, I'm older and I can't do that anymore. I can't serve in a physical way. But this verse right here reminds us, okay, in your youth, you're going to be able to do all of those things, but you still have a purpose in your old age. You still have value. Now, back to talking about kind of how our culture looks at aging. In our culture, and this is something that I don't think you see in a lot of the rest of the world, but we've kind of been conditioned to this idea to expect to be able to retire, right? And so I think we're fortunate to live in a country where we can have the kind of jobs where we can earn money, we can be prudent and set money aside, and not just take care of ourselves in our later years, but actually enjoy doing some of the things that we're not able to do when we're trying to take care of the responsibility of having a job. So we've kind of been conditioned to this idea that, at a certain age, you stop working and you retire, and you do kind of what you want to, and you enjoy the fruits of your your labor of however many years that is. I guess most of us probably retire probably in our 60s, maybe early 70s. I have a friend that retired at age 50. He worked for the state for a long time. But whatever that is, we have been conditioned to this idea of being able to spend the last several years of our life kind of taking it easy and not having so much responsibility. Now, I'm not suggesting that there's anything wrong with retiring, because I am looking forward to retirement. The older I get, the more I look forward to retirement. But is it possible that this idea of retirement, of having this privilege of working hard for a certain number of years and then being able to kind of let all of that go and relax, is it possible for that attitude to creep into the church? Is it possible for that to influence our attitudes towards doing God's work? You have any suggestions of how that happens? I'll say this. I don't see that much in this church, because all of the older people that I have been influenced by and have known, they may retire from their jobs, but then they basically start a new life in throwing themselves into doing the work of the church and into serving others. Mary Ann Niemeyer is the first person that comes into my mind. Mary Ann has been retired for 30 years, but she has not had an idle moment since, and she has thrown herself into carrying out God's will. And she still does that today, even though she's not able to do it in the way she once was able to. But have you ever known somebody that they're faithful Christians, and they're faithful about working and being involved and serving others, and they get to a certain age and they say, well, I've done my part, I'm done. I'm gonna let the younger folks take care of this now. Have you ever known anybody like that? I've seen that happen a few times, where people just, for whatever reason, I guess they feel like they can't contribute anything anymore, and so they just sort of back out of being involved in the work of the church. I think that if we're not careful, we can convince ourselves that as we get older, our most productive days of serving others and carrying out God's will are behind us. And I would like to suggest throughout the course of this study that maybe it's the opposite of that. That at the time when we start to realize that our bodies are becoming more frail, that as we lose our energy and our ability to do those physical things that we once did, that it's at that time when we really have our best days ahead of us in terms of contributing to the church and influencing other people and blessing other people, whether they be fellow church members or family or friends, believers or unbelievers. I feel like we can look at it as our best days being ahead of us. If you would, turn to Psalm chapter 92, and I'm going to read verses 12 through 15, which kind of help to illustrate my thoughts along these lines. Psalm 92, verses 12 through 15. Okay, and it says, "The righteous will flourish like a palm tree. They will grow like a cedar of Lebanon. Planted in the house of the Lord, they will flourish in the courts of our God. They will still bear fruit in old age. They will stay fresh and green, proclaiming, 'The Lord is upright. He is my rock, and there is no wickedness in him.'" Let me go back and read verse 14 one more time. They, talking about the righteous, they will still bear fruit in old age. They will stay fresh and green. Okay. So like I said, when we get to the point where we think that we really don't have anything more that we can contribute because of our physical infirmities, our lack of energy, whatever you want to call it, the pain that we may be suffering, that might be the point at which we really have a greater ability to offer something that is as valuable, if not more valuable, than our physical labor. And what I'm referring to is sharing our wisdom and our knowledge with others. So let me return to the question that I asked at the beginning of class. I asked, who is the most wise person you've ever known? And if you don't mind sharing, what is the circumstance under which you really notice their wisdom revealing itself? So if anybody wants to be the first, or if you want me to say who mine is first, and then I'll tell you who mine is first. If you had asked me this question 4 or 5 years ago, who is the wisest person you've ever known? I would have told you, well, it's a toss-up between my 2 grandmothers, because both of them were very intelligent ladies. But more importantly than that, both of them were very godly women. They both, I really think, strove to live righteous lives. They knew Scripture frontwards and backwards. They understood it. They were seekers, and they sought to do what God wanted them to do. So I saw a lot of wisdom in those 2 ladies, and I still think they're extremely wise. But having experienced what I did with my mother over the last 4 years, when she went into the nursing home, and I was able to watch her up close go through this process of gradually losing her strength and her physical ability, and really more so in the last year of her life. That's when I really understood the depth of her wisdom. Because here's somebody, if you didn't know my mom, she loved to be outside. She loved to garden and go on walks and enjoy, working and being busy all the time. And so she went from, living out there in the country and being able to go and do as she pleased to, how when you get older, sometimes your world shrinks. And there she was in the last year of her life. She was a resident up at Hillside, and so her world had shrunk to an 8x10 room. And I remember, and some of you who went to her funeral remember me talking about this, that when she first went into Hillside, I worried about her because I thought, she's got to be bored sitting there, because she didn't like to watch TV, and she liked to read, but she said, well, I can't read anymore because my hands aren't steady enough. And so I would say, Mom, what do you do all day? This has got to be torture for you to just sit here. And she said, no, I can always busy myself. And she said, physically I can't do anything anymore. I've got to rely on other people to help me do pretty much everything. But she said, I can still pray for people. And so that's what she would do. She would think about people that she had known, family members, friends here at church, and she would pray for those people. That's extremely powerful. And so she showed me, as a younger person who still had plenty of energy and ability, I could not understand how somebody who was like that at one time, now confined to a bed, not able to do anything, how they could be happy. I just couldn't grasp that. But my mother, I guess in her wisdom, saw that this life is temporary, and that her suffering, if you want to call it that, was temporary, that there was something better waiting for her on the other side. And she told me one time, she said, you know, when I wake up in the morning, I've got a choice. I can either choose to have a good day and be happy, or I can choose to have a bad day. And she said, most days, I can think of at least one thing to be thankful for and to be happy about. So I saw a lot of wisdom come out in my mother, and during that last year of her life, I'd say she elevated herself to the level of my two grandmothers. A lot of times we see people's wisdom revealed not during good times, but we really see it come out during the most challenging part of their lives. And we're going to talk about obtaining wisdom through pain and suffering today. I didn't quite get to that point. We'll pick up there next week. That's where James chapter 1, verses 1 through 8 come in. But I think a lot of times we really see people's wisdom revealed when they're undergoing suffering and pain. And that's part of what those first few verses in James talk about is this idea of becoming wiser, but doing it because you're undergoing a difficult time. You're under fire.